afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Rachel, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, Top 6 Communication Trends Impacting Contact Centers in 2016, hosted by 3CLogic. First, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. Representing 3CLogic, we have Guillaume Sainha, VP of Sales and Marketing, who brings over 10 years of experience in sales and customer service. In his role, he routinely shares best practices regarding how to marry technology and business processes to enhance the overall customer experience. Welcome, Guillaume. We're excited to have you here today.
Rachel, I appreciate you having me.
During this webinar, Guillaume is going to help us explore some of the challenges today's businesses are encountering as it relates to their customer engagement strategies, but how to minimize and eliminate them, the top 6 trends impacting the contact center space, and how to effectively implement all necessary solutions, channels, and best practices into your contact center to drive customer satisfaction, employee engagement, and revenue. So at this point, I'm going to give the floor to Guillaume.
Rachel, thank you for the introduction, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. It's a pleasure to have you. Obviously, this is one of many webinars that we host throughout the year. So if you enjoyed today's event, I certainly encourage you to make sure that you're aware of our upcoming webinar calendar, as well as any prior webinars that we have hosted on the website. As Rachel mentioned, the purpose of today's webinar and discussion is really to take a look at what are some of the trends that are most notably coming out of 2015 and presumably going to drive both 2016 and 2017. And really, ultimately, and it should come as no surprise, the underlying trend is that the contact center space is fundamentally changing. If it's not cloud, pulling or bringing into question the use of hardware and on-premise, it's the new channels and mediums, digital channels that our customers now choose to use in addition to traditional outlets like the telephone. It's also the use of mobile as opposed to more traditional outlets. So again, customers now are on their feet, on the road. They are not necessarily as easy to target as they were in the past, and obviously expect our businesses or your businesses to be as flexible and mobile as they are. And then also it ultimately comes down to the impact that customer experience has had with regards to how businesses approach their consumers today, especially when it comes to communication. If in the past communication was largely initiated by the business, what we're seeing today is a lot of it is now initiated by the consumer, and it's on the business to be able to respond accordingly. And that obviously is going to bring about some significant changes in terms of how today's businesses need to operate in order to do so effectively. Which really brings us to the first trend, which is that ultimately today, for a business to be successful, you're going to have to be willing to integrate and align the different departments that to date have largely been segmented. And I'm talking about sales, marketing, your help desk, even your IT team. For the longest time, technologies have largely tried to address these departments in individual silos. But now when you talk about the customer journey, customers expect you to seamlessly have insight into all these different aspects of the customer relationship, and that's going to necessitate that you have the ability to bring them together and unify them. And the impact is pretty obvious. If you look at organizations today, those that have aligned their different platforms to really provide almost a seamless interface despite using different solutions perhaps in the background have seen on average a 30% return for their investments. And if you compare that to other solutions that have otherwise continued to operate perhaps what you might term as the traditional form, where sales operates in one silo, marketing another, and there's some limited discussion between the two, but it's not collaboration, certainly not down to the individual consumer. Those institutions, they don't necessarily see growth. In fact, they tend to see a loss, in this case, based on research, about 7%. And the driving reason behind that is that most companies today will willingly admit that they actually don't have a single view into the consumer. And that's interesting because if you take yourself and look at yourself as an individual use case, it's actually expected, you would expect that when you call a Verizon or a Comcast or, take your pick, a Best Buy, that they know that you made a previous purchase, that you know that you had a problem with that purchase, that you know that you called about that issue and that agent 1 or 2 promised them X and a follow-up and so on and so forth. That's one use case, but really to drive home the idea that when you're the consumer, you expect companies to know as much about your requirements as you do your own. But unfortunately, if you look at the way organizations are organized and prepared, there's actually quite a big gap. which is really what pushes the need to actually integrate solutions across the different spectrums of departments and use cases, whether it's your call center, marketing, sales, or even customer service management. And here, you obviously, what we have displayed here is different leaders within the respective spaces that they fulfill, but looking at them not just as individual silos, but then connecting the dots and actually allowing them to work together to achieve a common goal, which is to service the customer in the way the customer would want to be addressed. And that is largely contingent on the information being readily available, regardless of where it may reside, so that you are actually prepared when it matters most, which is at the time of the interaction. Again, whether you initiate it or in today's world, most likely initiated by the consumer. Which brings us really to the next trend, which is that businesses are going to need to be able to also be able to not only operate in an integrated fashion in the back end, so between solutions, but also on the front end. And that relates to the different channels that have come to light in the most recent years. When you look at where we were prior, maybe 20, 30 years ago, telephone was really the main medium that most individuals operated by. You could argue maybe even still postal mail. But now you look at the advent of email, text, chat, social media, video. There's probably not a single medium that any of us hasn't already used in a different capacity, whether for personal usage or to actually communicate with another institution. And so if, from the business perspective, if you don't have or provide access to your business for the consumers via these different channels, most likely you are not operating on all cylinders, and most likely preventing a consumer from really initiating a dialogue with you in a fashion that either is convenient for them at that time or is a personal preference of theirs. And they're going to move around, right? It's not that one customer is going to adhere to only one channel. They may have a preference, but most often they're going to rotate among the different channels. So it's important to have access to all those digital mediums so you can in fact maintain a complete view of the different interactions that a consumer may have initiated with your business. And the reality is digital channels are actually overtaking traditional forms of communication, the one most notably compared to being the telephone. If you look at 2006 versus 2013 versus 2015, there is a 35% of all interactions are now taking place across different mediums. And 10 years ago, there was no web chat, there were no smartphones, there was no social media, and there was very little email, and that has fundamentally changed. And we have but to look at how we operate today, even in our own personal settings, to know that is true. And only really 11% of consumers believe that companies actually effectively use those digital mediums, whether it be mobile, social, or so forth, in a unified fashion, which really points to the fact that despite all the technology out there, even with cloud and so on and so forth, that there's still a lot of work to be done for we as businesses to be able to actually meet the expectations of today's consumer. Now, that can be a hurdle. It can also point to an opportunity. And I think you're going to see a lot of opportunity in 2016 and 2017 if you take on the challenge of bringing in these digital formats into your daily workflows and workflow or business models. And so obviously, if that's the case, then the obvious question is, okay, well then that's easier said than done. How do we actually resolve that? Well, it's about bringing them into the contact center. So, in 2020, if we look at social media only, an estimated 90% of customer service inquiries by 2020 will be handled through a Facebook, a Google+, a Twitter, a LinkedIn, an Instagram, and most likely through some other providers that have yet to be invented. I mean, these companies didn't exist 10 years ago, and yet now they are actually one of the most powerful channels that businesses have to recognize and even respect. But again, right now, the majority of those interactions are handled by perhaps a sales and marketing department. They are not handled by the help desk. They're not handled by, presumably, your call center or those individuals that field incoming calls. And yet, if you, again, look at yourself as a consumer, when you have an issue, you're most likely going to report it on a social media platform. And if those mediums are being monitored by marketing isn't in the right state of mind, most likely doesn't have the right tools and solutions available to address them in those inquiries or complaints in the appropriate fashion. So there's a fundamental shift that has to take place, and one that I think we're going to start seeing in early 2016 and then growing from there, is that some of the responsibilities as it relates to social media will most likely be pushed over to the call center space. Because if you see, as it stands, over 41% of companies still rely or assign social media to their marketing team. And again, that's great for outbound. It's not really good when you're on the receiving end. Marketing is meant to generate brand awareness. It's not necessarily meant to handle incoming sales inquiries or complaints or from existing customers as well as potential prospects, right? And this brings into the idea or the concept of social customer care. So this is sort of a new medium, the idea that social is no longer a sales or marketing tool, but also a customer service one as well. And that's why it may very well in the near future, and I think we'll see it in 2016, begin to take root within the call center space, which means that your agents are going to have to be trained to handle social media. And the different challenges that are going to take place there that are perhaps not prevalent through traditional formats like the telephone. And this leads us to trend 4, right? The need for businesses to flexibly adopt the adoption of cloud and SaaS solutions. If you're going to be able to quickly implement or accept different forms of medium channels and solutions, it's going to be very hard to do it through traditional software integrations, hardware, servers, and so on and so forth. And that's why cloud is gaining so much popularity. This service as a platform that cloud facilitates. And ultimately, I mean, the truth and the pudding is in the numbers. Businesses absolutely need flexibility. If you look at it, 96 of businesses expect to grow within their current contact centers in the next 2 years, primarily to support the business growth and customer experience demand. You're going to be very hard pressed, or it's going to be cost prohibitive to do that using traditional platforms that exist today. And cloud is going to facilitate that transition. And then if you look at it, 72% of businesses also plan to transform their contact center through the consolidation and establishment of other departments. So again, this may be a matter of defining or making sure we have a similar definition of what a call center is. The antiquated view of a call center is a sea of individuals with headsets sitting on a couple different floors addressing a similar department. The reality is now call centers, if you have 10 sales reps that are making outbound calls, you have a call center. If you have 5 individuals handling a specific support queue, you could make the case that you have a call center. Anybody that's responsible for maintaining and representing the dialogue that takes place between business and consumer is presumably going to be a call center or a call center agent. And for that, they're going to need to be far more versatile in their ability to address the different inquiries that are going to come across their desk. Because again, the customer expects an agent to be multifaceted. They expect to be both a sales agent, a marketing individual, an IT specialist, and so on and so forth. And so for that to be possible, businesses are going to need to be flexible and have the software be flexible enough to give that type of scalability and flexibility, customization on the fly. And at the same time, contact centers are expected to grow, not only in North America, but in Asia and the Middle East. So, and that's driven again by the fact that the definition of what a call center is expanding based on the fact that now everything is driven by customer experience. And the majority of contact centers are going to continue to rely on on-premise solutions today. But if you look at where the trend is headed, 70% of them have already stated an interest in moving their solutions to cloud. So again, if you haven't considered cloud as a potential opportunity to enhance your existing business, your competitors are. And that's going to be a major trend in 2016. It already started in 2015 and 14, but we're seeing it gain steam. Another trend that we expect to see in 2016 is the customers and businesses embracing the use of self-service and knowledge management. Right now, web self-service is actually overtaking voice as a primary resource for customers. If I look at myself, if I am given the opportunity to go and resolve my own issue on my own terms within my own timelines, that would be preferred, obviously. And obviously, with enhancements in terms of knowledge-based systems and solutions, web, site interface, and so on and so forth, it's becoming increasingly possible. And for that reason, the volume and demand for voice is to some extent going down. And 67% of consumers actually prefer using self-service over speaking to a live representative. Again, this is a universal survey. It's relating to any and all incoming inquiries. So we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that a knowledge base is going to have limitations. 40% of customers that contact a call center have already tried using a knowledge base to address their original inquiry. So while knowledge bases are a preferred medium, perhaps the first attempt to solve an individual need that I might have, if those knowledge bases are insufficient or haven't met that requirement, ultimately individuals are still going to default to wanting to contact the actual institution itself. And that's where voice is still going to play a role. So while it's going to decrease in popularity in 2016, and I think moving forward, the relevance and criticality of that call when it comes in is actually going to go up. And that really establishes the fact that voice, by any means, is not dead. It's not a medium that is disappearing. It's simply its role within the call center space and its significance in terms of the overall customer relationship is going to increase. Largely because if a consumer ultimately is trying to reach a business, it's because all other avenues have been tried, tested, and ultimately have failed, leading to the conclusion that only a live representative is actually going to be qualified to address the requirement. And you can see that in the data, right? As inquiries become more complex, customers are actually increasingly deferring to wanting to speak with a real person on the phone. So if you look at the data here in front of you, for simple inquiries, face-to-face, text messaging, online chat, company website or email, social networking through a site, those are all mediums that are still viable options to try and address a very simple inquiry. But as you move from left to right, as the inquiry becomes increasingly more complex, the desire to want to defer to a live individual, to actually contact that business directly, is actually still the primary default for consumers. And I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. And I think that's going to be an ongoing trend moving forward, despite the prevalence and growth in the other mediums that we've already discussed, including digital. And that ultimately comes back to the importance of the human interaction. At the end of the day, we are all still human. And when things really go wrong, we're going to default to our human intuition, which is, or human tendency, which is to want to speak to someone to have them help walk you through the process. It's not that other mediums won't perhaps still be satisfactory. It's that at the end of the day, if we're talking about customer experience, the human interaction, that component is still critically crucial to any success at the business level. So those are the 6 trends. What I thought would be helpful is just kind of give a high overview of 3CLogic. We are ultimately a call center solution. We are a cloud-based platform, and we specialize in enhancing the communication platforms between business and consumer. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we are one portion of a much larger machine. So we have the ability to that extent to tap into a CRM or workforce management or a ticketing solution. Again, the idea of bringing them all together so that at the point of interaction when that conversation takes place, both agent and consumer have the opportunity to have the best experience. We can do route calls, we can do skill-based routing, again, everything that facilitates the interaction to ultimately lead to a more successful, more efficient customer experience. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to make myself available. Feel free to contact 3CLogic using the information that Rachel is going to cover. Rachel?
Thanks, Guillaume, for your time. We hope everybody enjoyed the presentation today. And if you would like to learn more about 3CLogic, please visit our website or contact us directly using the provided information. Thanks again.